I sat at a round table shoved so far back it was almost touching the kitchen doors. I could hear the crash of dishes and the low shouts of the kitchen staff as they hurried to serve the guests. The smell of food, oil, and detergent filled the air around me, a sharp contrast to the fragrant centerpieces and champagne flutes glittering across the grand hall. My son Daniel stood on the dance floor under a golden spotlight, laughing with his new bride, Madison. They looked beautiful. They looked happy. They looked as if I didn't exist. I had paid for everything, every flower on the table, every song that played, every plate of food being served. I did it without complaint, without condition, because that's what mothers do. But as I sat at that forgotten table, my name not mentioned, my presence was barely acknowledged, something inside me shifted. A server brushed past me with a heavy tray, bumping my chair without apology. I clenched my napkin in my lap, forcing a smile onto my face. I had promised myself I would not cry. I had promised myself I would not ruin this day. But when Daniel raised his glass for a toast, thanking Madison's parents for their unwavering support, I felt the sting like a slap. I stood up slowly, feeling every pair of eyes snap toward me. I walked toward the stage, each step louder than the last in my own ears. I took the microphone from the startled DJ. My hand was steady. My voice was calm. I paid for this wedding with love, I said, locking eyes with my son. You repaid me with shame. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people gasped. I canceled the honeymoon. The silence that followed was a void, wide and deep, swallowing every fake smile, every whispered insult, every moment they thought I didn't notice. I placed the cancellation slip on the cake table, turned without waiting for a response, and walked out into the night air, free finally from the need to be small for anyone. There was a time when Daniel was my whole world. When he was born, I was 29, freshly divorced and terrified. My ex-husband, Frank, had left before Daniel even took his first breath, chasing after another life and another woman, without so much as a second thought. From the beginning, it was just the two of us. Me and this tiny boy with dark hair and wide, wondering eyes. We didn't have much. For a long time, home was a small 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, where the windows rattled when trucks passed by. I worked as a receptionist during the day and cleaned offices at night. I packed Daniel's lunches with handwritten notes, saved every penny for his school trips, and sewed patches on his jeans when they wore thin. Still, we were happy. I built a life around him, not out of obligation, but out of the fiercest love I had ever known. Every bedtime story, every science fair project, every scraped knee and broken heart, I was there. Not because I had to be, but because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. When Daniel got older, I pushed him toward opportunities I never had. Summer camps, music lessons, tutoring for the SAT. If he needed it, I found a way to afford it. I picked up extra shifts, skipped vacations, even canceled dentist appointments for myself to make sure he had everything he needed to thrive. And he did. Daniel blossomed into a kind, bright, charismatic young man. He got into a good college on a partial scholarship, and though he still needed help with expenses, I was proud to be able to support him. I sat in the audience at his graduation, clutching a bouquet of roses, tears blurring my vision as he crossed the stage. That day felt like a reward for all the years of struggle. When he introduced me to Madison 2 years later, I welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, polished, confident, everything Daniel deserved. She laughed easily, called me Mom almost immediately, and gushed about how grateful she was to join our little family. At first, it seemed like everything I had sacrificed for was finally falling into place. They got engaged after a year of dating. Madison's family was wealthy, the kind of wealthy where holidays meant trips abroad and graduations meant new cars. Still, they insisted they couldn't contribute much to the wedding. They offered vague promises of small gestures, But the big costs, it was quietly implied, would fall to me. I didn't hesitate. When Daniel asked if I could help fund the wedding, I said yes without blinking. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted his day to be perfect. I wanted him to stand before all the people he loved and begin his new life surrounded by beauty, joy, and hope. I dipped into my savings, cashed out a small life insurance policy I had been keeping for retirement, and wrote checks that made my stomach twist when I signed them. But I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that love given freely would always find its way back. I told myself that family meant sacrifice, and that someday Daniel and Madison would understand just how much I had given. During the early months of wedding planning, it still felt good. Madison called me to ask my opinion on colors and flowers. Daniel invited me to the cake tastings and venue tours. They even asked if I would accompany them when they toured potential honeymoon destinations, joking that I had the best taste. I smiled through every meeting, every tasting, every little disagreement they had over details. I thought I was part of something, part of building something beautiful. When I mailed out the checks to the caterers, the florist, and the travel agency, I imagined Daniel and Madison starting their life on a foundation I helped lay. I pictured them looking back years later and thinking, Mom made this possible. In those moments, sitting at my kitchen table late at night with spreadsheets and bills spread around me, I felt a deep, aching satisfaction. Exhaustion, too. Yes. But underneath it, a solid core of pride. This was what love looked like, I thought. Sacrificial, unselfish, complete. I had no idea that the very things I thought would bring us closer would eventually be used to push me aside. I had no idea how invisible I would become, how forgotten by the very people I had built my life around. But at that time, sitting among flower catalogs and honeymoon brochures, I still believed. I still trusted. I still thought I mattered. The first sign that something wasn't right came during the bridal shower. It was a Saturday afternoon at Madison's parents' house, a sprawling colonial home with manicured gardens and a circular driveway. Their backyard had been transformed into a pastel wonderland with white tents, satin ribbons, and towering floral arrangements that looked like something out of a magazine. Guests buzzed around tables draped in linen, sipping champagne and nibbling on tiny quiches. I stood near the entrance, a carefully wrapped gift in my hands, smiling politely at women I barely knew. I had spent the entire morning making sure my outfit was just right, not too flashy, not too plain. I wanted to represent Daniel well. I wanted Madison's family to see that I belonged. When Madison spotted me, she rushed over with a gleaming smile, her hands fluttering excitedly. "Mom, you made it," she chirped, wrapping me in a quick perfunctory hug. I smiled back, a little stunned by the greeting. She had never called me Mom before without Daniel prompting her, but today it rolled off her tongue easily. I told myself it was a good sign that maybe we really were becoming a family. As the afternoon went on, the laughter grew louder, the stories more animated. Madison's maid of honor, a tall, stylish woman named Bree, tapped her glass and called for everyone's attention. "It's time to celebrate Madison and her amazing journey to this day," she announced, grinning as Madison blushed and took the center seat. One by one, friends and family members stood to toast Madison. Her mother praised her grace and determination. Her father beamed with pride, recounting how she had always known exactly what she wanted. Friends shared stories of Madison's college days, her achievements, and her dreams. And then Madison stood up, raising her glass high. "I just want to thank everyone who made today and this whole wedding journey so special," she said, her voice ringing clear. "To my amazing parents who've supported me every step of the way. To my best friends who have been my second family. To my future husband for loving me so much. I couldn't have done any of this without you." There was applause, whistles, cheers, and glasses clinking. I clapped too, even as a strange tightness formed in my chest. She hadn't mentioned me. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. Maybe she had simply forgotten in the excitement. Maybe she thought it went without saying. After all, Daniel knew how much I had done. He would remember, wouldn't he? But when I glanced at him, standing near the back with a drink in his hand, he just smiled and raised his glass to Madison like everyone else. He didn't look at me. He didn't seem to notice. I sat down slowly, placing my gift on the table in front of me. I kept my smile fixed firmly in place. I laughed when others laughed. I nodded when someone asked me a question about Daniel's childhood, answering with practiced ease. Inside, though, something small and sharp lodged itself into my heart. It wasn't about wanting attention or needing praise. It was about acknowledgement, about not feeling like a guest at my own son's celebration, a guest who had paid for the party, but wasn't even listed on the invitation. At the end of the shower, Madison approached me with a wide smile and arms laden with gifts. "Thank you again for everything, Mom," she said quickly, almost as an afterthought. "We really appreciate it." I hugged her, murmured that I was happy to help, and tucked that tiny wound away where no one could see it. On the drive home, I told myself it was normal. Weddings were stressful. People forget things. Emotions ran high. "Don't make it about you," I whispered aloud in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "This day is for Daniel, not for you." But as the houses blurred, past my window and the sky darkened with the first hints of evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been given a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see, something that would only grow harder to ignore as the days went on. After the bridal shower, something between us quietly shifted. Though at first it was so subtle, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Planning the wedding became a slow erosion of whatever place I thought I had in Daniel's life. It started with the little things. Decisions were made without me, and I would hear about them after the fact through casual mentions in group texts or half-hearted updates over rushed phone calls. One afternoon, I stopped by Daniel and Madison's apartment, a basket of homemade cookies in hand. I thought it would be a nice surprise, something to make them smile amid the chaos of wedding prep. Madison answered the door, all polished and breezy, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Oh, you brought cookies." "That's so quaint," she said, laughing lightly as she took the basket and set it aside without a second glance. "We're just finalizing the menu right now. Sorry, it's kind of a madhouse in here." I stood there awkwardly as Madison's mother, Eleanor, waved at me from the dining table, where she and Madison were bent over binders and mood boards. Daniel sat between them, nodding absently as they rattled off vendors and timelines. "Did you get my email about the florist options?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Madison didn't look up. "Oh yeah, we already picked. We're going with the garden roses and eucalyptus theme. It's what's trending right now," she said, flipping a page. I hesitated. "I thought you wanted to discuss it together. I had a few ideas. I was excited to show you." "This time," Eleanor answered, her tone cheerful but dismissive. "Caroline, we just thought it might be easier to streamline the decision-making. You're so busy with work and all. We didn't want to burden you." The words hit harder than they should have. Busy with work. I had rearranged my entire schedule to be available for them. I had taken time off, missed opportunities for overtime, canceled commitments. All because I believed they wanted me there. Because I believed I mattered. I left the apartment that day feeling like a guest in my own son's life. And the days that followed only deepened that ache. When the invitations were finalized, my name was barely a footnote. Not mother of the groom, not hostess, not even a warm acknowledgement. Just a small mention under Daniel's name, lumped between caterers and florists in the list of special thanks. At the cake tasting, I was an afterthought. Madison and her mother tasted first, made notes, and discussed among themselves. By the time the samples reached me, most were half-eaten, and the flavors already chosen. "We're going with the lemon lavender tiered cake," Madison announced, glancing over her shoulder. Hope you like it, Caroline. It wasn't about liking cake. It wasn't even about flowers or fonts or seating charts. It was about slowly, surely being pushed to the edges of a life I had helped build with my own blood, sweat, and tears. Worse still was Daniel's silence. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't intentionally hurtful. But he also wasn't paying attention. He was caught up in Madison's world. A world where everything had a price tag, an image to maintain, a story to tell. When I tried to talk to him gently about feeling left out, he brushed it off with a tight smile. Mom, it's just wedding stuff. It's not a big deal. Don't take it so personally. I smiled and nodded the way mothers do when they know arguing would only widen the distance. But inside, another piece of me crumbled. There were dinners I wasn't invited to, planning meetings I only heard about later, decisions made in rooms where my chair had already been removed. And with every passing day, I grew smaller in their eyes, reduced to a name on a checkbook, a signature on a contract, a background figure in a celebration that would not exist without me. I told myself to be patient, that things would feel different on the actual day, that maybe all of this tension was just pre-wedding stress, and once the vows were said and the dance floor opened, I would feel like part of the family again. But somewhere deep inside, I knew better. Somewhere deep inside, I could feel the final threads of connection fraying, one cold, dismissive moment at a time. The moment that truly broke something inside me came at the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a trendy bistro downtown, a place with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb chandeliers, the kind of spot that Madison's family favored for its casual, chic vibe. Long tables were arranged down the center of the room, lined with gleaming silverware and hand-lettered place cards. Madison and her mother had insisted on handling the seating arrangements, saying they wanted everything to flow naturally. I showed up early, wearing a soft blue dress Daniel once told me was his favorite. I clutched a small wrapped box, a vintage watch I had spent months tracking down, something I wanted to give him privately later, a gift that symbolized time, legacy, and love. When I approached the hostess to check where I was seated, she scanned the list and pointed me toward a small round table near the back. Again, close to the restrooms. I blinked. Are you sure? I asked, keeping my voice light. She smiled tightly. Yes, ma'am. Table 9, right over there. I walked toward it slowly, the room seeming to stretch farther and farther away. Table 9 was tucked behind a potted ficus, practically in the hallway. I could already see that the main tables were reserved for Madison's family, her bridesmaids, her college friends, and a few of Daniel's new co-workers. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and folded my hands in my lap. I told myself it didn't matter. The important thing was that Daniel was happy. As the room filled up, laughter and energy grew louder. Madison floated through the room, glowing and golden. Daniel followed, shaking hands, clapping backs. At one point, he caught my eye from across the room. I raised my hand in a small wave. He smiled briefly, then turned back to Madison as she tugged on his sleeve to introduce him to another one of her cousins. Dinner was served. Toasts began. Madison's father stood up first, tapping his glass with a butter knife. A toast to the beautiful couple, he boomed. We are so proud to welcome Daniel into our family, and to Madison. You have been a light in our lives since the day you were born. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Applause broke out. Madison beamed, dabbing. At her eyes with a linen napkin, Daniel raised his glass toward Madison's parents, mouthing, "Thank you." Then Madison's mother stood up. She gave a long, emotional speech about watching Madison grow into the incredible woman she's today. She thanked her own parents, her friends, and even Madison's college professors. Not once, not even once, did she mention Daniel's side of the family. I waited, hoping that maybe Daniel would stand next, that he would say something to balance the scales, something to pull me into the circle where I thought I belonged. Instead, Bree, Madison's maid of honor, jumped up for a toast. I just want to say, she giggled, swaying slightly from champagne. Madison's always been amazing, and now she's finally got the perfect family to match. Laughter exploded around the tables. Even Daniel laughed, lightly punching Bree's shoulder. I sat frozen, a smile stretched so tightly across my face, it felt brittle, like porcelain, ready to crack. Perfect family. The words rattled around inside me, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the music playing in the background. I thought about every scraped knee I had bandaged, every night I had spent worrying, every meal I had skipped to make sure Daniel could eat better. I thought about standing in the rain, waiting for buses when I couldn't afford a car. About the lonely Christmases, when it was just me and Daniel decorating a tiny tree. None of it mattered here. Here I was, a guest at a table near the hallway, smiling politely while people toasted a life they believed had started the day Madison met Daniel. When dinner ended and people stood to mingle, Daniel finally came over to me. He ruffled my hair, the way he used to when he was a teenager. "You good, Mom?" he asked, his voice casual, almost distracted. I looked up at him, the boy I had raised, the man who now barely saw me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Of course, I'm proud of you." He grinned, kissed my cheek quickly, and disappeared back into the crowd. I sat there alone at my little table, the laughter and clinking glasses swirling around me like a storm, and I realized something simple and devastating. I didn't belong here anymore. The day of the wedding arrived wrapped in early autumn sunshine, the kind that hints at colder days coming, but still feels warm enough to pretend summer isn't over. I woke up early, even though my role was minimal now. Months ago, I had pictured this morning differently. Maybe helping Madison into her dress, maybe sharing a quiet moment with Daniel before everything changed. But in the end, there were no requests, no invitations, no last-minute errands for me, just silence. I made myself coffee, dressed carefully in the navy gown I had bought months earlier, and pinned a small corsage to my wrist, a token gesture Madison's. Mother had dropped off the night before with a note that said simply, "For the mothers." No personal touch, no warmth. Still, I told myself, today is not about you. Today is about Daniel, about letting go gracefully. You're such an important part of our journey. Important part. I laughed bitterly under my breath now, how quickly words can turn to dust. As I scanned the paperwork, something caught my attention. A single paragraph highlighted faintly in yellow from a meeting months ago. Primary payer reserves full rights to alter, reschedule, or cancel trip before departure without penalty. I stared at that line, my finger hovering over it. I was the primary payer. In fact, I realized, flipping through more papers, my name was listed on almost every major vendor contract. Not Madison's, not Madison's mother's. Mine. A ripple of something. Not anger, not sadness. Exactly. But something sharper stirred inside me. All this time, I had thought I was powerless. That I had been shoved into a corner without recourse. That I was nothing more than a checkbook with legs. But it wasn't true. Quietly, silently, without even realizing it, I had been holding theirist all along. Not because I wanted control, not because I planned to use it, but because I trusted them. Because I believed love was enough to protect me from needing leverage. I sat back in my chair, the papers spread out in front of me like a battlefield map. The coffee grew cold in my cup, forgotten. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt the faintest flicker of power hum through my veins. Not rage, not revenge, just the knowledge that I wasn't as helpless as they had treated me. I could cancel the honeymoon. I could call the caterer. I could unwind every piece of their carefully constructed celebration if I wanted to. The thought made me inhale sharply, my heart thudding against my ribs. I didn't know yet what I would do. I didn't know what justice would look like, or if I even wanted it. But what I did know, what settled deep into my bones like a promise, was that I had been blind, And now I could see. I had discovered something much more important than a legal loophole. I had discovered myself again. Not the mother who gave endlessly, without boundaries. Not the woman who smiled through humiliation. Not the silent benefactor standing politely in the shadows. Me, Caroline Hayes. A woman who deserved more. A woman who could choose what happened next. And for the first time in a long time, that choice was mine alone to make. That afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm in my hands, watching the world move outside as if nothing had changed. Neighbors watered their lawns. Children rode bicycles down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. But inside me, something had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet realignment, the way a river slowly changes course after a long, steady erosion of its banks. A simple, undeniable realization had taken hold. I didn't have to keep standing on the sidelines of my own life. I had spent decades pouring myself into Daniel, shaping my days, my energy, my hopes entirely around his needs. When he needed comfort, I had been a fortress. When he needed an opportunity, I was a bridge. And when he needed support, even when he didn't see it, I had been the invisible hands lifting him higher. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was a person too. Not just someone's mother, not just a background character in someone else's success story. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with an unexpected kind of peace, a slow, unfolding calm that wrapped itself around me and whispered, "You are not broken. You are not less. You are enough." But for the first time in a long time, I saw my life not just in terms of who I had lost or who had left me behind, but in terms of what I still had, what had always been mine. Whether anyone noticed or not, I still had my strength. I still had my dignity. I still had my voice. And sitting there in that small sunlit kitchen, I decided I would use it. Not with shouting, not with bitterness, but with quiet, steady certainty. I pulled out a notepad from the kitchen drawer, the same one I used for grocery lists and reminders, and began writing. Not about Madison or Daniel or the wedding, about me. I made a list of things I loved but had put aside. Painting, even though I hadn't picked up a brush in years. Gardening, though my backyard had gone wild with weeds. Traveling was something I had once dreamed of before life narrowed my world into survival mode. Simple things, ordinary things. But they were mine. Pieces of myself I had abandoned for the sake of being everything to someone else. I thought about all the times I had told Daniel, "You can do anything you set your mind to." Maybe it was time I started believing that about myself too. Maybe it wasn't too late to build a life that didn't revolve around being needed, but simply about being. The idea terrified me. It thrilled me too. Later that day, as the sun dipped lower and turned the sky a rich, aching orange, I made another decision. A small one, but monumental in its own way. I went into my bedroom closet and pulled out an old canvas and a box of paints I had stuffed away years ago, telling myself I'd get back to it someday. My fingers trembled slightly as I set everything up on the kitchen table. I stared at the blank canvas for a long time. For a moment, the doubt surged. What if you're no good anymore? What if you never were? What if it's too late? And then, just as quietly, a different voice rose up, stronger, clearer. It doesn't matter. This wasn't about being good. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. This was about reclaiming the parts of myself that had gone silent. I dipped my brush into a streak of deep blue and made the first stroke across the canvas. It was shaky, imperfect, human. It was also mine. The hours slipped by without notice, the house filling with the scent of turpentine and the soft whisper of bristles against canvas. I painted without a plan, without fear, letting the colors bleed and swirl however they wanted. By the time I finally stepped back to look at what I had made, my heart felt lighter than it had in months, maybe years. It wasn't a masterpiece. It didn't need to be. It was proof. Proof that life didn't end when others stopped applauding. Proof that even if I had been pushed aside, forgotten, dismissed, I could still create, still move forward, still choose joy. I cleaned my brushes, washed my hands, and stood at the sink, watching the paint swirl down the drain. Tomorrow, I will begin setting things right. Tomorrow, I will take back my place, not just in Daniel's life, if he even wanted me there, but in my own. Tonight, I took the first step, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. For the first time in months, the heaviness that had lived on my chest had shifted, lighter now, like a storm that had passed through, but left me standing. I made a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled out the wedding folder. Again. This time, I wasn't looking at it with sadness or regret. I was studying it carefully, methodically, the way you might study a map before setting out on a journey. I laid everything out in neat rows: catering contracts, venue agreements, transportation receipts, and the honeymoon reservation. All of it was tied to me. All of it was under my name, my credit card, my authority. I hadn't realized until now just how much I had given and how much power I still quietly held. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't interested in creating a scene or causing chaos. That wasn't who I was. But I needed to send a message not just to Daniel and Madison, but to myself, that I mattered, that my voice wasn't something to be politely ignored or brushed aside. It started with one phone call. I dialed the number listed on the honeymoon paperwork. A boutique travel agency Madison had chosen for its luxury customized experiences. A cheerful woman named Lisa answered. "Hi, this is Caroline Hayes," I said, my voice steady, calm. "I need to discuss a booking under my account." There was a pause as she pulled up the reservation. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes, I see it here. Congratulations to your son and daughter-in-law." I almost smiled at the irony. "Thank you. I'd like to cancel the honeymoon package effective immediately." Another pause, a longer one this time. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes, since you are the primary account holder, you have the full right to make changes or cancellations. There's no penalty due to the coverage you selected. It was done within minutes. Simple, clean, no fireworks, no drama, just a quiet, decisive severing of the thread." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came with taking back control over a life I had almost let slip through my fingers. I moved on to the catering deposit next. I wasn't cruel. I didn't cancel the event retroactively, but I called the catering company to adjust the invoice. "Please update the final bill to reflect only what was provided at the reception," I said. I wasn't paying for the post-brunch they had scheduled for Madison's extended family the next morning, the one they had planned without even inviting me. Piece by piece, I untangled myself from the obligations they had so easily heaped onto me without respect or acknowledgement. I wasn't erasing the wedding. That had already happened. I was simply drawing a line where none had been drawn before. And I did it all silently. No angry texts, no dramatic confrontations, no warnings. I wanted the silence itself to speak. I wanted the absence of my support to be louder than any words I could have said. After I finished the calls, I went outside and sat on the porch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I watched a squirrel dart along the fence line, busy and unbothered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt strangely light. I didn't know how Daniel or Madison would react. Maybe they would be furious. Maybe they would be embarrassed. Maybe they wouldn't even understand at first why it had happened. But none of that mattered anymore. This wasn't about hurting them. This was about standing up for the woman who had been standing alone for far too long. It was about reminding myself that love given freely should never be mistaken for weakness, that kindness didn't mean invisibility, that sacrifice should never cost a person their dignity. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The groundwork was laid. The silent setup was complete. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the hurt and exhaustion, a quiet fire began to burn. Steady, fierce, unafraid. The next time they looked for me, they would have to look harder, because I would no longer be standing quietly in the shadows, waiting for them to see me. I was already gone. The day after the wedding brunch, the one I had quietly pulled my funding from, the ripple effects began. At first, there was silence. No frantic phone calls, no angry texts, just an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air, like the sky holding its breath before a storm. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. I washed dishes. I folded laundry. I pulled weeds from the backyard garden that had been neglected for far too long. There was a strange satisfaction in the simple, tangible work of it, of reclaiming tiny corners of my life I had long abandoned. By late afternoon, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Hey, Mom. Weird question. Did you happen to change something with the travel plans? Madison's a little freaked out." I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of the power in my hands. In the past, I would have rushed to explain, to soften the blow, to reassure him. I would have apologized before he even had a chance to blame me, scrambling to make things easy, to fix what others broke. But not anymore. I set the phone down without responding, not out of spite, not to punish him, but because silence was my answer now. Because sometimes the absence of rescue is the greatest lesson. A few hours later, another message came through, longer this time. "Mom, Madison's furious. The honeymoon is canceled. She's saying the hotel says the reservation is gone. Did you call them? Maybe there's a mix-up." I smiled sadly at the desperation tucked between the lines. For the first time, they were feeling the consequences of their choices, not because I lashed out, but because I had stepped away, because I had quietly, firmly refused to keep being the invisible scaffolding holding up their perfect little narrative. By evening, Madison herself called. I let it ring. When Daniel called immediately after, I let that one ring too. It wasn't easy. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to pick up, to soothe, to salvage. But I sat on the porch instead, watching the sun dip low behind the rooftops, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the moment the power began to shift. Not because I wanted to control them, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally stopped giving more than I received, because I had finally remembered that my worth was not negotiable. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my door. I heard the knock and hesitated for a long moment before opening it. When I did, he stood there with messy hair and dark circles under his eyes, looking more like the boy I had raised than the polished man I had seen at the wedding. "Mom, what's going on?" he said, his voice low, almost pleading. I stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. He paced the living room, agitated, wringing his hands. "Madison's furious," he said again, as if that was the worst possible outcome. "Her parents are humiliated. They're saying it reflects badly on her, on us." I sat down calmly on the couch, folding my hands in my lap. "Is that why you're here?" I asked, my voice steady. "Because of what other people think?" He stopped pacing, frowning. "No, I just don't understand why you would do this." I looked at him for a long, aching moment. "Daniel, did you notice where I was sitting at your wedding?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His shoulders slumped. "I paid for that wedding," I continued. "I paid for the food you ate, the music you danced to, the chair your new wife's grandmother sat in. And yet you sat me next to the kitchen like an afterthought, like a burden." Daniel's face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean to," he started, but I shook my head gently. "Meaning doesn't erase impact," I said quietly. "You didn't see me. You didn't stand up for me, and now you expect me to keep giving, to keep sacrificing without even basic respect in return." He sank into the chair across from me, the fight draining out of him. For the first time, he really saw me, not as a safety net, not as a backup plan, but as a person, a woman who had given everything and finally decided to stop bleeding for people who couldn't even say thank you. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply told the truth. Calm, clear, unapologetic. The power had shifted, not because I demanded it, but because I had finally withdrawn from a game I was never meant to lose myself in. Daniel sat in silence, absorbing it, and I let him. Not because I needed him to understand, not because I needed his apology, but because for the first time in our lives, I wasn't begging to be seen. I already knew my own worth, and that, not anger, not silence, not even cancellation, was the real shift. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but I barely heard it. I sat at my back table seat watching everything unfold. The speeches, the dances, the staged moments Madison and her family had so carefully orchestrated. In their eyes, I wasn't a part of this celebration. I was the furniture, the checkbook, the inconvenience they were too polite to acknowledge. A part of me wanted to leave, to slip away into the night like I had nothing left to give or say. But another part, the part of me that had spent years swallowing hurt and dressing it up as understanding, knew it was time to stop. I sat quietly, letting the last strands of guilt untangle themselves inside me. This wasn't about creating a scene. It wasn't about revenge or ruining anyone's night. It was about dignity. It was about finally stepping forward after years of standing aside when the DJ announced that it was time for the thank you speeches. The room hushed in anticipation. Daniel and Madison were supposed to say a few words to express their gratitude to honor the people who had made the day possible. I watched Daniel approach the microphone, his face bright, flushed with happiness. Madison clutched his arm, radiant in her shimmering dress. "We just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Daniel began, smiling around the room. "It means so much to us to have all of you celebrating this moment with us." Madison beamed, her perfectly manicured hand squeezing Daniel's arm. "Especially our parents," Daniel continued. "Your support has meant the world to us." And then he turned slightly toward Madison's parents first, of course, launching into a heartfelt tribute about their generosity, their kindness, their unwavering love. When he finally mentioned me, it was almost an afterthought, a hurried, generic acknowledgement, and of course my mom. "Thanks for everything." The crowd clapped politely, already shifting their attention elsewhere. I sat still, the blood pounding in my ears. I thought about every long night I had worked 2 jobs to pay Daniel's tuition. Every Christmas I had spent alone wrapping dollar store gifts and pretending they were enough. Every meal skipped, every coat mended, every tear wiped away before Daniel ever saw it. Everything I had done, not for recognition, but for love. And now here I was, thanked with a casual shrug in a room full of strangers. Without thinking, I rose from my seat. The room didn't notice at first. I walked slowly toward the stage, weaving between tables, my heels clicking steadily against the polished wood floor. By the time I reached the front, the DJ had frozen, holding the microphone awkwardly. Daniel and Madison turned, their smiles faltering when they saw me. I took the microphone gently from the DJ's hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just spoke. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It truly is a beautiful occasion, and I am so proud of my son and the man he has become." Daniel smiled nervously, shifting on his feet. But I think it's important to recognize, I continued, that while love is freely given, respect must be earned. And tonight, sitting in the shadows, watching from the margins, I realized something. The room grew still. People turned in their chairs. Even the servers froze at the edges of the room. I realized that sometimes the people who give the most are the ones most easily forgotten once the gifts are unwrapped. A murmur rippled through the guests. I reached into my purse and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper, the confirmation from the travel agency. I paid for this wedding, I said calmly, looking directly at Daniel. With love, with sacrifice, with every ounce of faith I had in being seen, in being valued, I placed the cancellation confirmation on the cake table beside me, letting it sit there in plain view. I canceled the honeymoon. Gasps echoed through the hall. Madison's face turned white. Daniel's jaw dropped. I canceled it, not out of spite, but because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the lesson that love should never be taken for granted. I handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ and walked off the stage, my head high, my heart hammering against my ribs. Not with fear, but with something fierce and freeing. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The confrontation wasn't about destruction. It was about truth. It was about stepping out of the shadows and refusing once and for all to let my love be mistaken for invisibility. And as I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking in time with my heartbeat, I knew I hadn't lost anything that night. I had finally found myself. I expected that after the wedding, after the confrontation, there would be backlash, angry calls, bitter messages, cold shoulders from people who only knew half the story. But what happened next surprised me in a way I never could have planned. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to dozens of messages, but not from Madison's family and not even from Daniel. They were from guests, people I hadn't spoken to much at the wedding, people I barely knew. I just want you to know, one message read, "Your speech was the most honest thing I've ever heard at a wedding. It was brave." Another said, "I've never seen someone stand so tall while being treated so small. You reminded me of my own mother." One woman even wrote, "I wish my mother had stood up for herself the way you did. You're an inspiration." Message after message rolled in throughout the day. Some from cousins I hadn't seen in years, others from Daniel's friends, even a few from members of Madison's extended family. They all said the same thing. "We saw you. We understood. It turns out you can only hide truth for so long." No amount of carefully staged photos or designer dresses could erase the fact that a mother was shoved aside at her own son's wedding. People noticed, and once they noticed, they couldn't unsee it. The story traveled fast, faster than I expected. Madison's perfect social image began to crack. Whispers circled about how she had treated the woman who had funded their dream day. Invitations to upcoming events started quietly drying up. Madison's own bridesmaids, who had once giggled at her jokes about my quaintness, suddenly weren't answering her calls. Madison's family tried to control the narrative, of course, claiming it was a misunderstanding that I had misinterpreted my role. But you can't explain away a public humiliation. You can't erase the sting of truth once it's been spoken into a room full of witnesses. Meanwhile, Daniel was left standing in the wreckage without the smooth social glide Madison had planned, without the adoring crowd he had hoped would carry them into their new life. At first, he tried to call me. I didn't answer. Then he emailed, a long, rambling message full of half-explanations and weak apologies. "I didn't realize how bad it was. I thought you were okay with everything. I thought you knew how much I appreciate you." But appreciation whispered after betrayal sounds a lot like wind against a closed door. I sat with his words for a long time. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because real reconciliation doesn't start with excuses. It starts with accountability. Over the next few weeks, word quietly spread through our small town. I went grocery shopping without sideways glances. I went to church without whispers behind my back. If anything, people were warmer now. Strangers who nodded respectfully, who smiled a little wider. It wasn't fame. It wasn't revenge. It was quiet justice. The kind that comes when you stop shrinking yourself for people who only know how to take. Madison's parents tried to make amends, too. A glossy, formal apology email full of phrases like miscommunication and regrettable oversights. I didn't respond to that either. Some apologies aren't meant to heal, they're meant to save face. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled. He tried to reach out again. A single text this time. I miss you, Mom. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I sat with that text for a long time, too. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding what and who is worth the space in your life. I didn't rush to answer him. He needed to sit with the consequences the way I had sat invisible at the back table of his wedding. The final justice wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It was standing in my kitchen one morning, sipping coffee from my favorite chipped mug, feeling no anger, no regret, just peace. It was knowing that they could spin whatever stories they wanted. They could rewrite the guest list of their lives. They could deny, deflect, defend, but none of it changed the truth. I had stood up. I had spoken. I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had finally stepped into a life where I was no longer waiting for anyone else to recognize my worth. The final justice wasn't them suffering. It was me healing on my own terms. It was about 3 weeks later when Daniel showed up at my door again. No call ahead, no warning, just a soft knock. Hesitant, almost apologetic. I opened the door to find him standing there, hands jammed deep into the pockets of a jacket that still looked too big on him, like he hadn't quite grown into the man he thought he was. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale, the bravado I had seen on his wedding day completely gone. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated just long enough for him to notice, for him to realize that access to me, once taken for granted, was now something that had to be earned. Still, I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had once helped him with homework, baked him birthday cakes, listened to his teenage dreams spill out late into the night. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I messed up," he said simply. "I didn't see it. I didn't see you." I stayed quiet, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. I let them treat you like you didn't matter. And I didn't stop it. I thought you were just, tough, fine with it. But you weren't. He looked down at his hands, twisting the edge of his jacket. You shouldn't have had to be. It was the first time he had ever truly acknowledged it. Not with excuses, not with justifications, but with real naked truth. I looked at my son, my once little boy, who had leaned on me so heavily for so long, and I felt both an aching sadness and a softening inside me. I reached across the table and placed my hand lightly over his. "You're right," I said quietly. "I shouldn't have had to be invisible to be loved." Tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I want you to know I see you now. And I'm sorry it took so long." Hearing it didn't erase the hurt. It didn't fix everything, but it mattered. And not because I needed Daniel to love me to feel whole anymore, but because I could finally meet him from a place of strength, not desperation. I squeezed his hand once before pulling mine back. "I love you," I said. "I always will. But love has to live in truth now, Daniel, not in convenience." He nodded, wiping his eyes roughly. We sat there a little longer, not rushing, not forcing anything. Two people learning how to start again if they wanted to, on new, healthier ground. 15. Final reflection. That evening, after Daniel left, I walked out into my porch with a cup of tea in hand. The sun was just setting, painting the sky in soft purples and golds, the kind of sky that made you feel small and eternal at the same time. The breeze was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of the late-blooming jasmine that curled along the porch rails. I sat down in the old rocking chair I had sanded and repainted myself years ago, back when Daniel was small, and the future still felt wide open. I rocked gently, letting the world settle around me. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the heartbreak, the bitter clarity, and I thought about everything I had gained by standing up, by drawing a line where no one else thought it needed to be drawn. The biggest lesson wasn't about Daniel or Madison. It wasn't even about betrayal or justice. It was about value. My value. It had never been tied to how much I gave, how much I endured, or how quietly I accepted mistreatment. It was mine. Intrinsic, non-negotiable. And the beauty of that realization was this. Whether Daniel found his way back to me or not, whether Madison ever learned from what happened or continued spinning her own version of events, none of it could shake what I had reclaimed. My life was mine again. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth settle inside me, and smiled into the fading light. Not because everything was perfect, not because the wounds had magically disappeared, but because for the first time in a very long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And it was enough. It was more than enough.